So, forward, back.
Terrific. Because I can't stand behind a podium. I walk, I pace, I should have been an Italian. Can you guys hear me? If I don't stand behind there, I'll try to project and speak loudly. First of all, thank you all very, very much for joining us again today. I'm so excited to be here with Christchurch. I woke up this morning and I was on the phone with my boss, who is back in San Francisco, extraordinarily beautiful place, and we were talking about all of the beautiful places we're in and we're have the privilege to visit. And as he's telling me about the gloriousness of the Bay Area, I opened my windows in the hotel this morning to see the most magnificent sunrise I've seen in the world in all of history. It was this glorious blue and pink with an enormous rainbow across the arc, and I
we put it on specially.
It was extraordinary. So I won the bet today for Christchurch being the most glorious place that we've been in so far. So again, my name is Bryna. I'm the Vice President for Relationships of the organization of 100 Resilient Cities. It's such an honor and a privilege to be here today. And I wanted to talk a little bit about resilience and our kind of viewpoint, our evolving viewpoint, if you will, on what resilience is. So resilience comes from a few different sources of origin. In ecology, it's the capacity of natural systems to maintain and recover functionality, which kind of feels a little bit flat, I'm sure, to everyone in this room. It's been used in engineering, the restoration of business as usual and systems when they fail. Again, I imagine that feels a little bit flat to everyone in this room. But for communities of people, we like to think about this as evolutionary resilience. That there's a nugget of constant learning, that it requires action at multiple different levels, and that we recognize not only are there shocks, acute shocks, which occur oftentimes in unknown circumstances and affect us kind of deeply and with strengths, but stresses that erode at our systems over periods of time. So we think of these shocks and stresses really kind of decaying our systems and our functionality over time. And certain systems just are not able to recover and take a path of decline. But we see as resilience that opportunity not only to bounce back to where we were and what the trend line was, but actually use that as a moment of opportunity and create this evolutionary path. Our definition, our working definition of resilience right now is the ability of a city to maintain its essential functions and to evolve and emerge stronger in the face of those acute shocks and chronic stresses. We're working with this definition right now, but us being a very resilient organization, this will also be evolving based on the experiences we're having with 100 cities around the world. So expect this to evolve as well. What do we mean by shocks and stresses? So I mentioned that acute shocks are these things, these actions, these thrusts that come often at unknown times within cities, like earthquakes. Obviously, here we've experienced an enormous amount of tragedy from unexpected earthquakes, tsunamis, flooding, heat waves that occur in cities, but they can also be man-made activities, such as hazardous material incidents. We saw that in New Orleans, a city very near and dear to me, with the BP oil spill that forever changed the Gulf Coast. We see that with events like terrorism, unexpected shocks that hit our systems. Chronic stresses, on the other hand, as I mentioned, are these things that are corrosive, that erode our systems over periods of time, and we don't feel them in exactly the same way that we feel shocks. There are things like pervasive lack of affordable housing that exists and derail communities. They are high, pervasive unemployment within a city that's unsustainable. There are things like natural drought and water shortage that over a period of time, again, affects all of the other functions in the cities within the city. Environmental degradation, aging infrastructure, food shortage. And what you can begin to see with the correlation of these two lists is when these stresses, these pervasive, corrosive things exist over time, when you actually have an acute shock to your system, these are going to be the things that you feel really deeply. So I mentioned, and I've been mentioning through this presentation so far, functions of a city. And to us, this sort of center of this pinwheel, when we talk about a city, we're talking about the ecosystem of the city. So I'm not talking about municipal government. I'm not talking about all the city municipal agencies. I'm not even talking about the physical infrastructure of a city. I'm talking about all of you, the inhabitants, the things that we build within the cities, the community that exists within the city, the entire ecosystem of a city. And what we've realized, and again, this is a little bit of a theory so far, and we expect this to change a little bit, is these 8 functions that we're seeing are interdisciplinary. They are intersector activities that occur within a city. So no one discipline owns them, and no one person can see themselves just in doing any number of these things. So let me explain what that means. So a city, in order to exist, has to have a basic fundamental meeting of human needs within a city. Humans need water. They need water supply. Humans need housing to be safe. Safeguarding human life and health. Do we have a healthcare system? Do we have hospitals that safeguard human lives? Do we actually, though, as well, have parents that safeguard human lives? Protect, maintain, and enhance assets. Oftentimes when I talk about this function, people think about the physical infrastructure, the built environment. And that's true, we have to do that. But we also have natural assets in our systems. How do we protect our coastline? How do we protect and ensure all the rest of our natural assets are maintained for future lives and livelihoods within the city? Assets are also our human assets, by the way. So these are our children. Build cohesive communities with engaged citizens. Obviously, we're seeing a lot of that in this room here, so there's obviously a strong functionality of cohesive communities. But how is this more robust? In my breakout session just then, we were talking about the disparity between certain other townships in the city here within Christchurch. What's the relationship between Christchurch and other cities and its kind of cohesiveness? Because there's interdependencies there. Enforce the rule of law and justice. This one, when we often look at outside at other communities, this becomes really obvious. Like, how corrupt are other governments? How much does democracy exist in another culture? But actually, when we go peel across the layers and we look at our enforcement of things like codes and building codes, when we look at how our regulation pertains to things such as roadways, when we peel away the enforcing the law of rule and justice, actually even very progressive nations and cities need to do a fair bit of work in this space. Generate and share information and innovation. Of course, this is not only how we do this technologically and share data and information, but this is how we also share information and innovate within our workplaces or within our neighborhoods and share what's going on. Support of livelihoods and foster economic prosperity are kind of two sides to the same coin. One is about individual livelihoods, so our ability to work and earn income and support our families. And then the other is a much kind of more meta level of the community as a whole, having a robust and diverse economy so it can grow. So what's important about thinking about these functions that exist within the city is not only that they must exist and we must be able to provide those essential functions, but in terms of resilience, we do them in a certain way that builds resilience. So all of these different kinds of functions, if we think about these kinds of qualities, and I heard them all this morning in the mayor's remarks and many of our breakout sessions, accepting of uncertainty and change. How much have we experienced a lot of that here? Being reflective and being adaptive. That seems to me those qualities have either been here historically or those have really emerged since some of the tragedies that you've been facing. How resourceful are we? How diverse are we? So redundancy in our systems obviously is something that we think about in terms of one of the things I saw yesterday and heard about yesterday on my tour is if there's only one road in or one road out, we don't have a lot of redundancy in our system, and that is a risk that we face. But also diversity. Are we maintaining flexibility? Do we have different kinds of options? Are we thinking with an open mind in that flexible space? And then, of course, inclusive and integrative. People and places and the ability to collaborate with people in those places that are often not like us. And how embracing are we about those kinds of dynamics? So we've sort of summarized through a bunch of different research that the Foundation has been doing for years, if not decades, that these are some of the qualities that are emerging that give us greater resilience within those functions. And so we see these things very much as combined. You have to have these things existing, and they have to exist in not only a minimal level, but a productive level. And once you do them in a certain way, you can begin building resilience into your system. And I'll give you a couple of case studies. Hopefully they'll resonate with you a little bit. This was a Toyota plant that was built in Turkey. And the engineers who built this plant were the Toyota folks said, build this, we are in a seismic high-risk area, build this so that it is reinforced in every way against any kind of seismic incident. We don't want one column to fall or one beam to buttress. And so you can kind of see what happened. It was an extraordinary feat of engineering. This is after the earthquake, and you can see not only the plant itself, but the roadways that were built to serve the plant are highly maintained. It looks like a lovely operational facility. But anyone who's followed media knows that what actually happened in Turkey was highly devastating to the entire community. 17,000 people were killed, 50,000 injured. Economic damage was in the billions, with 500,000 people left homeless. Systems were down from basic essentials like water and electricity to distributed communication systems for months. And of course, the region, what you see of the Toyota plant there itself was nobody could get to work the next day. No cars were produced on those assembly lines. No workers were able to get those paychecks. And so we can build resilient products, but unless we have resilient systems, and unless we think about all of these things that are tied to one another, we won't have resilient cities. And so again, as we look at all of those different functions, had we thought about building that plant in all of these kinds of different ways very deliberately, I think that there might have been, I hope that there might have been a greater vision, a sounder vision, that this was not one piece of fabric, but this fabric needed to be integrated with the whole community. Tale of Two Blackouts, New York City. So my boss put this one in here, and he's really, really passionate about this because he's a New Yorker, Brooklyner. And so this is kind of a tale they tell in New York. In the 1970s in New York, the city was in real disrepair. It was on the verge of collapse. It was about to declare bankruptcy, but the President Ford at the time, said, go to hell, New York, essentially. I mean, it was a front page cover of a news story. And so New York was not cohesive. It did not have sustainable infrastructure. It did not have economic and human diversity. And so a blackout occurred, and what you see is chaos ensued throughout the entire city. This is not the picture that I thought it was, but in one of these pictures, what's ironic about this gentleman carrying the structure that you see is, this is an emergency phone. It's a call booth. So when there's an emergency, people were supposed to be able to go to these kinds of resources and call the police. And so it was in such chaos and such catastrophe that the city actually, at one juncture in this period, was lit on fire. New York is burning. There was a World Series game in which the announcer stopped and said, the Bronx is burning. So, in the year 2003, there was another blackout in New York. And this is the instead of. People coming across the bridges in an orderly manner, people working together, and you can see that there weren't fights, there weren't chaos, there was not police brutality existing. Municipal transportation kept on going. There was an extraordinary amount of redundancy in the system that was built in. And so what was the different story then in New York? What happened in those intervening 25 to 30 years? And anyone who has followed the path of New York understands that it wasn't just a series of top-down leaders, the Giulianis and the Bloombergs of the world, but actually a lot of different things were happening in New York at the time. Diversity in terms of the economy was occurring very deeply. Innovation in New York was happening quite a bit. Enforcement of the rule of law and justice was emergent in the city, and cohesive communities. So we started seeing New York integrate in different ways and people embracing diversity. And this one is near and dear to me and Erin. Our first workshop of this program, of this entire program, was held in Medellin, Colombia. Does anyone know who this is? This is Pablo Escobar. He was at one time thought of as one of the most powerful men in the world, and he was at the same time thought of as being the most violent man in the world. Medellin, Colombia was in the 1980s and the 1990s, the highest murder rate of anywhere in the world. The city was actually controlled by drug lords, and thereafter controlled by the FARC in their neighborhoods and their communities. All of those different city functions that I just described did not exist in any state in Medellin, Colombia. There was federal interventions to try to take back the city, in which the military service came in, and it was essentially all-out war between the FARC, the drug lords, and the communities, and guess how many human lives in the crossfire were lost. Really extraordinary disrepair in Colombia. Fast forward to when Erin and I went down there just a few weeks ago, and this is the site, this is the community of where Pablo Escobar used to live and control his cartel from. And what happened there in the intervening 20 years, how do you turn a city around in 25 years? Of what seems to be the most impossible, hopeless place in the entire world. What happened? What was the magic? And this is one of those ground-up situations that this was not government-led. This was resilience coming from beneath and rebuilding the city piece by piece. So what you see here is a famous escalator that goes up to the side of the hill. And they started discussions within this community of saying, our problems are access to these economic opportunities. Our problems are access to education. Our problems are access to the rest of the city where they see us as the unappealing. How do we do this? And so a group of engineers started working with the community to just say, how do we just simply get people in and out of these hillsides? It's a mountain environment. How do we get people in and out so that they can access these things? So there was an engineered design functional thing up and down the hill. And the community said, that's not good enough for us. We won't accept just some sort of straight thing intervention. We want this to be beautiful. We deserve lovely. And so some architects and some community designers came together and said, okay, we're going to do this in a way that is respectful of your place and brings you some beauty. They had artists come in and do paintings, and that wasn't good enough either. So the community said, we deserve community spaces. We deserve protection. We deserve health. And so what you're seeing in this image is an amalgamation of the community coming together and not saying to their government leaders, do this for us. It was saying, let's all come together and build a community center, which is what you see right there. Non-threatening, non-military, eyes on the street, which are community volunteers, which you see up in the corner. And a variety of other interventions that transform that place. And then what started happening in Medellin, Colombia, is a whole host of innovations around the notion that mobility and access for people and their citizens means building out all of those other functions within the city. And so they have these gondolas, which you can see, connect favelas in the cities and the working poor with all of those different kinds of services that I talk about when I talk about integrative work with all of these different functions. So Medellin, within a 25-year period, emerged from being one of the most awful places on earth to inhabit to building resilience in these very particular ways among all of these different functions. And so we go from being highest murder rate per 100,000 in the world, dropped significantly in this period of time. And so what I would say in closing of this is, and that's an example of a stress. So we talked about shocks and stresses, and that's an example of pervasive stress that existed within a city. What I would say about this is, I've heard a lot over the last couple of days since I've been here, how trying and how horrible the experience of the earthquakes have been for this place. And my heart breaks right along with you of seeing all of this beautiful fabric of your place lost, your human lives, your friends and family and community centers and schools. I have no doubt in my mind that the recovery of something like Medellin did, that Christchurch can do, and do much, much more. You already have so many of those extraordinary qualities built into your functions. It's a matter of how you come together and build them in resilient ways. Thank you.